So with Git, the best place to answer your questions or for, figuring out what's going on, the official Git documentation is where to go. And while I don't think it gives the best examples all the time, and it's fairly technical, it does have everything in here. Excuse me. It has all the flags explained and such. But a lot of the time it just tells you kind of what it does. So force, when switching branches, proceed even if the index or the working tree differs from head. This is used to throw away local changes. When checking out paths from the index, do not fail upon unmerged entries. Instead, unmerged entries are ignored. And like doesn't help much in the general sense of like, what does this really do? Force means like, I don't care what I have, get rid of it, and just do what I'm telling you to do. So lots of times it's not as helpful as it could be, but hopefully it gives a good, kind of starting point of kind of something that's going on. With force, I think this is used to throw away local changes, helps give some context. And then some Googling and such will get us a little bit closer. But yeah, I think while it's a little dense, it is the best place and best reference for Git information. So let's get started. So I'm going to create a new directory, Git discussion, and go into that directory. And yeah, that blue is horrible, but it's fine, I guess. We see we're in that directory now. And let's initialize this as a Git repository. So git init. We see initialize np Git repository, and it tells you where it's initialized. And by default, we're put on the master branch to start. So we're going to use this Git repo to go over some of the more quote unquote advanced Git concepts. And also some that aren't as advanced, but I think you'll see day to day all the time in working dev life. Things that I know I've done across multiple jobs that are fairly standard. Yeah. So before we really get going into, following the discussion based on the notes that I have, is there anything that you'd like to know about Git specifically? Like you had a question in your mind specifically, or two or three, or however many. When you saw the study group, you said, yes, that's going to help me answer this question. So any of those hanging around out there?
How do you open a project?
Okay. How do you open a project? And what do you mean by project?
I think like basically when I'm trying to, how do you say, copy it to my own like IDE, a project, and then I want to like see it run. So I want to kind of view the project that was made run. Like say it was a game, anything.
Okay, like somebody has a Git repository and you want to get it to your computer and have it running type of thing?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Got it. I'm writing down a note. Anybody else? Well, as we're going, if anything pops up or any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, put it in the chat, or just, speak it, and we will, or I will, address it, and we can hopefully get all those questions answered. So let's, let's talk about and thinking about the order to do things while answering your question that you just asked. Let's talk about, First, let's talk about one file that every Git repository should have, and what it is, what it does, and how to create one when you're first starting out and don't really know what to put in it. So that is the Git Ignore file. So if we look in our file, in our folder, we have one folder, .git. .git is what Git uses to keep track of everything. So that is a folder. You don't really want to go in there and mess with things because you can really mess up what Git is doing. But do know that that's what exists when you do git init. It creates this folder, and that's where it keeps all of the information. You never really see it, so it's not like, it does kind of feel like magic sometimes that Git is doing all this stuff, but it's just keeping some files in a folder to keep track of everything. So the Git Ignore file, and we'll create that. And I'm going to open my code editor so we can see it. Oh, new version, nice. The Git Ignore file is where we want to keep things that we don't want to go into version control. So Git, or version control in general, is designed to be, a place that you can recover from. So once something gets into version control, it's really hard to back it out without causing some major issues. You can rewrite history and delete files. So like if you upload a file that shouldn't be uploaded to a version control server, you can get rid of it. But if you do that and it rewrites all the history, then you have issues, because then everyone who's working from that repository will have issues because nothing's going to match up, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't want to have to ever do that. So how we get around that is we can ignore some things. So we use the Git Ignore file for things like, if we had passwords, we might have a passwords.txt file in here. Or, very common to see a .env file where we keep API keys and such. If you ever by accident commit a file that shouldn't be committed and push it up to your server or to GitHub or something, don't think that oh, nobody saw it, I got rid of it real quick, it's fine. Change all those keys immediately. Unfortunately, there are people that constantly scan places like GitHub for files that contain sensitive information, and they get it quickly, and they use it for bad purposes. So there's many stories of people whose AWS accounts, Amazon Web Services accounts, they uploaded a file by accident and they thought nobody saw it because they got rid of it quickly, and then at the end of the month they get like a $10,000 bill, because if you have the key, Amazon assumes that you are who you are and they let you do whatever. So change the keys and get the files out of version control. So we put in the Git Ignore things that we don't want to get committed and put into version control. And this can also match file patterns. It can do lots of different things. You can have wildcards in here. So there's lots of flexibility in this file. Now you might think, well, I'm just starting out. How do I even know what to put in a Git Ignore in general? I don't want to put some stuff in there that shouldn't be in there, but I also don't have enough experience to make one of these well. So there are some websites. gitignore.io is a good one. And this is probably overkill with what it puts in there. It's trying to cover every instance, but I find it works pretty well. So we could say, Ruby, maybe we're working on a Rails project. We're using Visual Studio Code as our IDE, or, I guess Atom doesn't have any files that it makes. If you're on the Learn IDE, Atom would be the underlying code editor, but yeah, it doesn't create any files. Visual Studio Code creates a dot folder with stuff sometimes. So Ruby, Rails, Visual Studio Code, and anything else that we might use. If we are using Node in JavaScript, or I don't think there's a JavaScript, no. Maybe Mac OS, Linux, or Windows. So you pick, some things that are all true, and you could create. Just like that, we have a Git Ignore file. We can select it and paste it into our code editor. And we have 139 lines of stuff. Some it's commented out, unless supporting RVM or doing something fancy, ignore this. For a library or gem, you might want to ignore these files. So these aren't ignored by default. In a git ignore, the hash is the ignore line for comments. But yeah, this would get you, lots of things ignored that a group of developers have decided, or in general have decided, this is not stuff that you need. Like in a Rails project, you don't want it to commit your databases. And this is a database. Database star.sqlite 3. So easy way to get one of these that's robust, and then over time, you'll start to learn, what needs to be in here and what doesn't. So based also on if you're doing a project, like when you do Rails new, a git ignore file is generated for you. So you wouldn't have to worry about this as much then. This is for if you're starting from scratch, you'll need something. So yeah, talked about that. Let's look at what was asked. How to get a project, somebody's project, on your computer and running. So let's go to GitHub for that. And let's go to Cernan. We'll go to Cernan's profile and find a repository and get it from his, public GitHub to our computer running. This is a React Rails. Let's see what his repositories look like these days. This is JavaScript. Here, this is React and Rails. So let's see if his README, he doesn't have anything in his README, but this is a Rails app. So typically you look at your README and it might have some info. So actually, I think I know a repository that we could look at. I think that's this person's, no. No. And so I just want to show a README, but I don't know if I could run this right now. Typically, this is a library to use, but there should be a development part of it. Okay, let me see if I can find. Oh, I know how I can find it. I think this is the website, which should have a link to the GitHub. Here it is. This is what I was looking for. So we see running locally. So a lot of repositories will have information like this, running locally. So to make sure you have Node, NPM, and PostgreSQL, clone. So you want to git clone, install, copy, start the app. Once you see that, running with Docker locally. So this is a little bit more involved. So I'm not going to use this one, but typically there's some information in the README to help with doing running these things locally. So I know that this is a React Rails app. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, and well, there's two ways that we can do this. One way is we can clone, what's called clone this exact repository and run it. If we want to actually, work with it some, make changes, potentially contribute back to it, if it's an open source thing, like this is an open source job board for the Nashville developer community. So, maybe I wanted to take a page and make it better or improve it or something. I think I've already forked it, so I won't be able to here to show that process. That's why I'll use this one because I know I haven't done anything with it. But we want to fork it. So like we see here, it says we can just clone it straight down, which we could. We can just get it and clone it down. However, doing that won't allow us to, when we make changes, to push anything back up to GitHub, because we won't have rights. We don't have access to Cernin's copy of the repository. So the standard workflow, and this is what happens with the Learn IDE and with all of the labs that you do on Learn, is when you do something like Learn Open, it's going to a repository on GitHub. It's forking that repository to you. You probably don't have a bunch of different things here, so you'll just have your own. And what forking does is it creates a copy of that repository right then. We see now this is under my username, and it says where it's forked from, and has a little fork icon. And then now this is the one that we would want to clone down. So we'll clone and copy this. I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to back out from this folder. I'm going to paste in that's the URL. So I'm going to git clone. And now it says cloning into. So now it's downloading all that code. And it puts it by default into a folder with this name, React Rails Field Notes Training Post, the name of the repository. So if we look at my list of folders now, we see React Rails Field Notes Training Post. So I can go into that folder. And knowing that this is a Rails app, I'm going to bundle. Which should, okay, I was gonna say it should be doing something. We can look at the actual code, gem file, Rails 5, proc file. So it's installing all the stuff it needs. And being a Rails application, whenever this finishes installing, because Nokogiri takes forever. So this is what Learn Open's doing. It's forking it. It's automatically cloning it down into that Code Labs folder. It's running bundle by default. So all this is happening for you. And taking its time because it takes forever for this one. And then it's opening it in the Learn IDE. So it's taking care of a few of these different commands for you. Any questions about what we're doing so far?
What point does it recognize rake? Because like sometimes I type that in, it doesn't know what I'm talking about.
I would think after yeah, it would be after bundle, because
okay, cool.
You're gonna need Rails for rake to do its thing, if my memory serves me correctly. Because I think rake is built into Rails. That's why it's not an explicit gem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And okay. And then the Zever finishes. So many gems. Okay. Rails DB migrate. Probably need to do. Okay. Database does not exist because it's Postgres. So it'll be Rails DB create. Then Rails DB migrate. Actually, I learned this recently. DB schema. You should use DB schema load. Yeah, I'd never known, like, I was just reading. I was like, I've never read this before. It says Rails DB schema load. And I talked to the backend guy where I work, and I was like, hey, it says Rails DB schema load. And he was like, I've never read that before. But yeah, so now we should be able to run our Rails server. And it's running. And we should be able to hit it. Localhost 3000. Yeah, you're on Rails. Now this is a React and Rails application, so looking at the code, I know that there's more going on. Like there's a client and an npm start that also needs to happen. So there's two parts to this. So there's probably a foreman start that needs to happen. So we're not seeing the actual application, but it's, the Rails server is running, and it's just a matter of figuring out what exactly needs to happen to boot up the front end too. But yeah, that would be how we get something running from somebody else's code on GitHub or any other version control system would be similar. So let's say we'll just keep on with this repository. It's a good example. So let's say this was, something open source, and we wanted to work on it, or this is a project that we're working on together. So if let's say I was working on this with Cernan, I probably wouldn't have my own fork, but we'll just act like there is. So, because in settings you can have collaborators, and here, if I remember, I can't ever remember my password. Is that it? No. They made me change it recently. That's it. Okay. You can add collaborators. So, like that's Mikey. He's a Flatiron alum too. I could add him, and then we don't need to fork to do stuff. We both have access to this repository. So that's probably how it's going to work when you're working. And go back. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong thing. So you'll have a repository and you'll want to work on it, but typically the workflow is what I've worked in the most, something called feature branch workflow. So every new feature will probably have, some sort of tracking. You'll have Jira, or you'll have Trello, or you'll have Asana. You'll have some sort of project management software that somebody will use to keep track of all the things that need to be done. It's always, you're never going to run out of things to be done. There's going to be like 10,000 of them all the time. But the most important things, will bubble up to the top, and you'll get to work on one of them. And while you're working on it, you'll want to create a branch, because typically master is seen as, the golden branch, the branch that you want to have code that's 100%, running. It's what's in production. It's what's working. That it's been through code review, and to the best of everyone's knowledge, it's what it's supposed to be. This is not, broken. This is, what's out there running right now. And as we iterate over it, we're going to add to it and make it better. So we'll want to branch, and to branch, we will do, git branch will show all of our local branches. Q. And to create a branch, we will do git branch and a new branch name. So I'm like, feature add new routes or something. Now, if we do git branch, we'll see we have this new branch, feature add new routes. Now, a shortcut, because typically when you create a new branch, well, we'll delete this branch and then we'll do that. So delete a branch is git branch -d, name of the branch. We see branch, deleted branch. Now, to create a new branch and go to that new branch at the same time, which is what I've found I've done, I think every time I've created a new branch, you know, I create the branch, go to it and start doing work, is git checkout -b, and then the name of the branch. And we're on there. So let's open this up. And we can do some work. Config routes. Let's add another route. This stuff in the API. I'll probably break things. Get this. This will be easy. Resources. Notes. Now, for your rake routes, notebooks. No, that didn't work. Okay. We'll put it down here inside the API. Resources, notes. That should do it. Okay, so now we have all these notes in here. So, you know, we've done some stuff and we're like, hey, we had to add this notes part. So we'll commit that. Did new notes, routes, notes, resource. And then we'll push that. Oh, since we just set it up for the first time, it doesn't know where to go to. So if we do git remote -v, do you have a remote? Oh, the branch doesn't have a remote. That's what's going on. Master has a remote, the branch doesn't. So we need to set that up. Okay, so our branch is pushed up. So now we see GitHub nicely tells us we recently pushed a new branch. And we're on that branch now, and we see in our config, you know, added new notes resource a minute ago. So let's induce a merge commit or a merge conflict, because that is something that you will see out in the wild, and they can be scary at times. So let's get, I have an alias of git to g. So instead of having to write git, I can write g because I write it all the time. G. And if we have time, we'll look at aliases. They're pretty simple to set up. So I won't go too in depth in them. Okay, so now we're on our second new branch. We see we don't have our notes in here. So let's do resources. User notebooks, users. Let's just say note cards. And then more new routes. and push. One nice thing about Git is it typically has pretty good errors that tell you exactly what you need to do. And it's easier to just hit the error, copy and paste than to, type it all out. Okay. So new branches, 2 of them. So let's open a pull request. So we're actually going to go to my copy, not Cern's copy, and create a pull request. So the pull request is going to check if there's conflicts and do the things. And this is where code review happens, and it'll show everything that's changed, and people can add comments on things and say, hey, why'd you do that? Or, this code could be better if you did it this way. Maybe this naming convention doesn't make sense, XYZ. Typically you have a pull review or pull request, and there'll be some sort of continuous integration set up. Tests will automatically run, and if they all pass, then it's okay. If not, you have to make sure that works, and code coverage and code quality and all types of things. So all that stuff typically will just run on its own automatically. So we see our one commit added new notes resources here. If we click it, it shows us what we changed. But we're good, we know everything's fine. So let's merge this. Confirm. And delete the branch. And I delete all the branches because you can restore them. So they're not really technically gone forever. So I just delete them to remove clutter. And that's something you'll want to get into the habit of doing on your own computer too, because over time you'll acquire a lot of local branches. Okay, now let's open another pull request for this other that we just created. Can't automatically merge. Don't worry, you can still create a pull request. Okay, let's create it and see what's going on. This branch has conflicts that must be resolved. So what's going on here? So we've created a conflict. And what's happened is, let me see if I can do this in a way that is, okay, this is our other one. Get rid of this, close this. I'm gonna make this one smaller, so hopefully we can see it. Okay, so line 13, I'm going to change the branches, and we're gonna see line 13 change. So right now we're on the local copy of the repository of the code. And on GitHub, we haven't gotten that new code yet where we merged. So I'm just going to go back to master. And we see line 13 is blank. There's nothing there. It does tell us your branch is behind origin master by 2 commits and can be fast forwarded. Use git pull, and we would want to do that. But first, let's look at what we did. So both of our branches started with this copy of the code, and then we have more routes, which adds resources note cards. And we have new routes. Which adds this resources notes. So what's going on here is both of these branches started without anything, without a change on line 13. They both said end. And now I can't remember which branch we're on, but the branch we're trying to merge now, there's something there. And it's not something that it started with. So it's saying, hey, I'm GitHub, and you're trying to change something that another human changed. So this has been explicitly changed by another person who has the correct access rights to put something into master. I, as GitHub, cannot decide which one is correct. So there's a conflict here. So you need to explicitly tell me which one's right. So we can do that right here on GitHub. We can resolve conflicts, which is very nice. And we'll see the conflicting code. So we see, this is the syntax for Git conflicts. And it's telling us the branch name, so feature more routes. And this one is the master branch. And then the way to resolve a merge conflict is to get rid of line 13, I'll make this bigger. Line 13, 15, and 17. So pretty much the chevrons is what it's looking to get rid of. This, this, and this. Even if you don't get rid of the text, just getting rid of this, this, and this will resolve the conflict. But this is saying, hey, you take a look at this, tell me what's right. You re-edit this code with both pieces there, and we'll figure out what it's supposed to be. So is it supposed to be notes or is it supposed to be note cards? Like 2 different developers worked on it and something happened. Or you worked on it yourself and something happened. So we could say, okay, we really want to go with note cards, not notes. We take all this out. And we say mark as resolved. And that will commit this change. And mark the conflict as resolved. So we see we have another commit here, merge branch master into feature more routes. What that did is it took all the code in the master branch and pulled it into this branch so that, they're pretty much up to date now. If we look, we can see, excuse me, there are no new changes to show, but you can still view the diff. So nothing to see, it was resolving that conflict. And now we can merge this in. And our code will have note cards. We can go and get rid of our branches. We'll get pull to get up to date. We'll see it pulls down one new line in our config routes. And then we can delete our other branches. New routes, was it more routes? And got rid of our branches. So this is what the learn code gem is doing when you do learn submit. It's pushing up your code. It's opening a pull request on the parent. So pull request on the parent in this case would be on Cernan's repository. And that's what's going on. Cool. So I think that's a good bit of stuff. Any questions with anything we've done thus far before we dive into some other things? I'm going to make a change so we can have another git commit. Let's say like working with this project. Git home, bundle install, mail server. Then we will add it. Updated readme. Okay, I want this more like back to normal size. Okay, so some other useful Git commands that are probably used sparingly is git diff, or yeah, git diff. We have to give it some information. So we can do git log. We can see our last commits and pull a commit number. Let's go back a couple here. And then do git diff the commit. It's going to show from our current where we're at and diff back what's changed. So we see, you know, we have README changes, or we got rid of all this text and we added in some text, the green. And that's what we've changed in between now and that time. We can go back further. Let's see, let's go back to here. We can do a diff on that. So commits have this really long hash, you know, letter number combination, but you really just need the first 7 to identify them. We see now we have more than one file, so we get each file that has differences and all the differences. You can do diffs between commits, so you can pick 2 commits and get the diffs. If we look in here, the reference shows all the options, commit, commit and commit, blah, 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 etc. Okay, 8:48. It's got about 12 more minutes. And let's look at aliases, because I've been using them throughout this study group. And as you start using Git more, you'll probably want to use more aliases because they save you a bunch of time. If you type Git like 50 times a day, if you can change that to G, you're saving 2 keystrokes, which over time helps a lot. And if you can change things like we see ACM here, that is git add all and commit -m. You know, that's all of that in 3 letters. So the simplest way to add aliases is to add aliases in your environment with the git config. So your terminal might have an alias function, or your terminal emulator, or what you're using might have a way to create aliases. And when you get to that point, you can put them in there if you want. But when you put an alias into your git config, and if you use the global flag, it'll be available everywhere on the machine. So if you play around with like ZSH and Bash and Hyper, and like you have all these different terminals, because as developers, we want to try everything, you know, all the time. It's like, oh, that's new, let's try it. Your aliases won't be available in that new one, because if you have them set up in your terminal, then they're only available in that terminal. So if they're in your Git config, then as a Git alias, they'll be available universally to the machine. So we can look at, let's see, Git alias. We see all the aliases that I have set up currently. So let's see, let's create another one. Let's see if I can think of one to create. Git. Some of these, I'm not sure where they came from. Like, I think a couple of these came with, because I didn't create these really crazy ones. But master, status. And you want to create aliases for things that you do all the time. Like this checkout -b I created because I realized I was doing it all the time. Commit. Okay, let's go back here. Find out how to delete one, because I can't think of any new ones right now. Git alias alias. Fine. It's not in here. What? Really? Oh, it's a config. Git config alias. That's probably why. Alias. There we go. Alias.new. Git new. Git. Okay. Git config delete alias. Unset. There we go. Okay. So I'll take this commit one out. So git config global unset alias dot c. Global unset alias dot. Okay. I guess that's a different alias. That must be coming from somewhere else. I don't know. I've done too much stuff to this computer. So got rid of that alias. So git alias. Okay, we see the CB one disappeared. So to set a global alias, it's git config -- global alias, and then a dot. Now, after the dot is going to be what you want your alias to be. So the left side of this, you know, this list is going to be what was it? CB. So check out a branch is what I was thinking. And then, while they can be very simple things like a single word, so we have checkout and if and status. So, you know, checkout. To do more complex commands, we enclose the command in quotes. So it'll be checkout -b. If we look at our aliases, our CB is there, and it is checkout -b. So this is a great place to add things as you find you're doing them a lot, the commands. And a great resource is in our. So these are a couple, you know, examples that you want to set up, that you might want to set up. Check out branch commit status. These are all very, very, very common. And some more info, like you can set up a global alias for last, which will be git log -1 head. So it'll show us our last commit. So if we did git the last commit, it'll show us and such. So 5 minutes left. Any other questions about Git or GitHub that are rolling around in your mind that you want to have answered? You're wondering how to do something or what something is. This is a great README or a little article on the Git flow workflow, which is common in some way, shape, or form. How can I clone a lab from GitHub and learn with no test passing? Like I already completed a lab, but I want to do it again. How do I get it from GitHub? So for that, you'll want to, well, there's a couple ways you can do that, but you'll want to, where's GitHub? You should have all the labs in your GitHub. So, you know, go to repositories. I can look up, you know, React, like quote maker React lab, like that. This is a lab from the Flatiron curriculum. And there's a few ways to do it. Actually, I think there's something in help that might be more straightforward and have a reference. Yeah, how do I restart a lab? So this will tell you some info, so I'll throw that into the chat. So there's a few ways you can do it. You can do it this way, which is going to create a new branch and then go back to master and reset the branch, which is this is probably the best way to do it. If this didn't work, you could always delete this repository and clone it again, which would be cool. But I like the idea of taking all your current code that you've worked on, putting it on a new branch so that you don't lose it. And then you can just reset the code to how it was when it started. And that is git reset hard. And that'll be, you find the place that you want to reset back to. Some more new routes, added notes. So let's go back here. This is before we made any changes. Copy. And quit. So if we open here, we can do git reset -- hard. And this is going to reset the entire repository to the exact spot it was at this moment in time. And we see the README reset to how it was. If we look at the routes are gone. The route that we added is gone. So you could take out, take all the code that you've written, put it on a new branch, so that you have a copy, and then go back to master branch and reset it based on the git log to where the last, commit that wasn't you, if that makes sense. But it's all in this article on help. You're welcome. Any other questions? It's a useful one too, just if you've been working on something and you go down a rabbit hole and you get to a point where you're just like, man, I wish this was just like back to a place where I knew it worked. You can look at the git log and say like, okay, I knew it worked here. And I just want to get rid of everything else I've done up until this point because I'm just completely lost. I want to start over. And you can reset hard to a place back in time. We see we've lost all of our commits so far afterwards. However, they are still on the remote. So this would introduce some odd challenges because of some things, but it should be all right in the end. But yeah, that is the end of our hour together. Thank you everybody for coming and spending some time. I much enjoyed it. Good questions. Yeah, have a great rest of your night if it's nighttime, or day if it's daytime. I know people are all over the place in the world taking this program. But yeah, thanks very much and have a good rest of your I'll say evening because it's evening for me. And yeah, you're welcome.